Welcome to Problem Busters. So, Jonathan, what's the plan for today?
Oh, thank you very much, Ollie. The plan today, we have what we like to call a problem buster. We have Edward Fenech, who is here to give us a run through of the problem that he's found, managing carbon emissions and the environment. And his solution, aptly titled Clean New World, is a paper on how to address it. So I'll introduce him now. Eddie, how are you?
Very well, thank you. Good evening, gents. How are you?
Good, thank you very much.
Welcome to the show.
Welcome to Problem Busters.
So let's begin. Shall we start with the problem?
Yeah, what is the problem? It's going to sound a bit preposterous. The problem is climate change, right? Arguably, probably the biggest problem we face as a species, probably over the next 50, 100 years. Some people say a lot less, possibly the next 10 or 15 years. And that's the problem I try to address in this paper. Some things I might say some things that are rather controversial, and I hope I don't hurt anyone, but I promise this to be as honest as I can, right? The issue of climate change, irrespective of whether people believe it or not, we need to treat it as a problem, right? And a problem requires a solution. And I think a lot of the furore around climate change is about creating noise. And I'm not saying noise isn't required. And there's a lot of noise around it. Some of it is effective, but noise alone will not solve the problem. Yeah. So the problem I'm seeking to address is a solution to this problem. A solution I believe is workable, and that's probably quite a generic word in itself, but a solution that can actually tackle this over, I would say, the next 10 to 20 years, because it is an urgency, but I don't see any quick solutions. But I believe this is a solution that can actually address the problem over, say, the next decade or two.
Yeah. So how did you come to the realization that of actually classifying your solution as workable? What were the parameters that you said, okay, this is a workable solution for climate change, as opposed to other solutions that are out there that may not that may not seem suitable? In your opinion?
I think I'll start that by addressing what I call the never-ending blame game. Right. When it comes to climate change, it always tends to be a circular blaming game. Right. You have citizens who blame the governments for doing nothing or doing too little. You have governments saying, "Oh, it's not a problem. The problem is business. Business is global. We can't really do anything about what big companies do outside their own jurisdictions." Then we have businesses saying, "Oh, we're only producing stuff because consumers want to buy it. What should we do?" And then you have NGOs who basically blame everyone else. And what I wanted to devise was a solution that I call a partnership solution, right? It's not somebody's going to take the hit. It's how do we create something that governments, citizens, businesses can work together, and that sounds a bit cliché, but you'll probably come clear as I talk more. How can we have a solution that involves the three of them, right? The three facets of this problem. Consumers who are consuming products, and by consuming products and services are directly contributing towards carbon emissions. Producers who produce the products or services, and governments who are expected to, within frameworks, deal with the issue. And that's kind of how I wanted to work around the problem, rather than, okay, which of the three are we going to blame most, so somebody has to do anything? Could there be a solution that involves the three of them? Mm-hmm. I'm going to say a few things that are going to be probably a bit controversial, right? We're living in a world where, rather than accept that you have some responsibility for a problem, it's much more convenient to just to blame the next person,
or to send it away.
Yeah, recently I saw a statistic that said the world's top 10 global corporations are responsible for 50% of the emissions. Now that's a statistic, right? But it doesn't really mean anything. Ultimately, if you strip yourself of the emotive stuff around climate change and around pollution of the environment, it's ultimately all consumer driven, right? No company on earth produces products to put on a shelf. They produce products for people to buy. Right. People will argue, yeah, of course, corporations have responsibilities to produce in a as much an environmental friendly method as possible. But ultimately, big corporations are not. Let's just not mention anyone, because I don't really want to turn this into, let's bash a large corporation just for the fun of it. Ultimately, they produce stuff because we want to buy. Right?
Classic
So
example being electric cars, right? As
yeah,
people started to want them, all of the car companies started to produce them.
yeah. And the solution I put together puts the consumer at the forefront in terms of responsibility, but also in terms of equipping them to be able to deal with the problem and work within the solution.
Right. And can we just touch on your background? Because folks will be starting to think,
Oh, okay.
he's talking quite economically, he's talking quite practically. What is your
So
background?
mini bio, right? I'm a 49-year-old male. I'll turn 50 on 3rd of April next year. I was born on the little island of Malta. I moved to the United Kingdom just over 12 years ago with my wife Suzanne, who's a music teacher. I have 2 adult children who are aged 23 and 22 who live outside the nest at this point. My education background is I studied accounting and finance, and I spent a big part of my life being what the Americans would quite adequately term a bean counter, right? A boring old accountant. Okay, but I've always had a very deep interest in politics and political solutions. If I had to start my life again, I'd probably go to university and study PPE. That's for my sins. But that's my background. I'm no eco warrior. I don't have some massive environmental credentials. For my sins, about 16, 17 years ago, I was involved with the Maltese Green Party. I was their economic spokesman for 4 years, and then moved to England after that. And I live a very kind of normal life. I'm not heavily politically involved, even though I listen and read and follow politics quite actively. That's my background. So I don't come with mega qualifications around the subject, but I think I come with probably a novel, fresh approach to it. And in some ways, it's an accountant's solutions for climate change, which sounds really, really boring, but I promise you it's not.
Well, I don't know about that, because that's practical. And that's
Yep.
what really interests me about this conversation, right, Jonathan? Because you kind of expect Eddie to be talking about tying himself to trees and his degree in plankton, and
That's never really been me, and I have the utmost respect for people who do that. In biblical terms, and I'm not a religious person, but I'm going to pick on a biblical analogy, right? In order to create Christianity, you needed 3 main actors. You needed John the Baptist screaming in the desert. You eventually needed the Messiah, but the most important person was the person who came after, which was Saint Paul, who actually built the religion using practicalities and using political systems. And I think we're still kind of at the first and second person stage of that. And I think what we do need is someone who actually now says, okay, we have the awareness, because at least in the West, we have a lot of environmental awareness. I mean, I know for my kids who kind of grew up in this aware attitude, their consciousness is pretty high around the issue, but people have to come forward with solutions that are implementable, practical, and most important, saleable at the individual level. Right?
Yeah, I agree. I think when you say that we're more aware about the environment, like now, I believe so, because I was around where when I was really young, we didn't have things like a recyclable wheelie bin. I know it sounds really small, but it's just those type of things that kind of sort of raise awareness where you think, oh, okay, so previously before this, there wasn't really much splitting or recycling of anything. It was all just ended up in landfill, if that makes sense. So, yeah, I think we are quite aware, and using that awareness in this way is just fantastic.
Yeah. Do you think we've kept them waiting long enough, Eddie? Do you think we should talk about the idea?
Let's deal with the problem here. Sure. So, Okay, it's going to be controversial. I have a market mechanism, a market-based solution for the problem, right? Which sounds really controversial because people in the green movement, environmental movement, the second you talk about market, it's like talking about Satan, right? However, the solution is market-based, and I'm not blending capitalism into the solution. I'll explain, right? I've termed my solution we introduce, okay, I'll try and give you the elevator pitch. It's a little bit difficult, but the elevator pitch is this, okay? We introduce a shadow currency, right? At the moment, we all have one currency we deal with. In the UK, it's mainly pound sterling, okay? We introduce a second currency, what I call a shadow currency. Just for marketing purposes, I've given this shadow currency a name, okay, so we can talk about it. That name is CARBZ. It's CARBZ, right? Just to have a name to work around that, okay? Now, this currency is not earned. You don't go to the job and earn this currency. This currency is allocated. So your country, your jurisdiction, on an annual basis, allocates each citizen a fixed amount of this currency, a fixed amount of carbs. I'm notionally going to say 48,000 carbs a year per person, right? Just to make it simple, it's 4,000 carbs per person per month, right? Now, what would you use this currency for? This doesn't replace pound sterling, it doesn't replace dollars, it doesn't replace euro. It's in addition to. However, you will need to expend this currency, so you will spend this currency every time, and I literally mean every time, you consume any product or any service. Okay? So anytime you consume a product or service, you're now going to have to pay in two currencies. You're going to have to pay in the currency you normally operate in, that will be pound sterling, right? So this is the money you earn through your job or through your profession. And you're also going to have to expend the carbs, the currency your government gives you on an annual basis. Okay, so let's talk practical level, right? How would this work? I'm going to try and illustrate how this would work. Let's make it really simple. The first example would be me, Edward. I go and fill up my car, okay, and I put into it 30, 40 pounds of fuel. But when I go to the cash to pay for this fuel, the person on the other side of the cash is going to ask me to pay in two ways. Okay, I'm going to have my card, which contains the money I have or have entitled to in pound sterling, and I'm also going to have a smart card, which is given to me by my government, which has the 48,000 carbs loaded onto it, so that when I pay for the fuel to fill up my car, I'm going to pay two amounts. I'm going to pay the amount in pounds, and I'm going to pay an amount of carbs. So I start reducing the amount of carbs I have available. So I start the year with 48,000. Okay, and when I fill up my car, they're going to say charge me 130 carbs. So I pay for my fuel, I walk out of the store, get into my car, and drive away. Okay, just to create a simple example that probably everybody listening to this can follow. But this won't only apply for filling up my car; it will apply literally for all forms of consumption I do. So it could apply to filling up my car. It could apply for me booking airline tickets. It could apply for me booking holiday accommodation. It will apply for me heating my home. It will apply to me buying food. It will apply buying drink. It will apply literally at the end of course, this will take quite a while to implement, but it will even apply when I go and get a haircut, right? Every consumption of product or service needs to have a price in carbs. And carbs will be basically the quantity of carbon, the production of the product or services generated that I am then choosing to consume. Okay, I don't know whether that's a sort of long-winded elevator pitch, but I hope that clarifies what the solution in outline at least is. Now, I can talk a lot around this, but the things I really want to focus on is this. The solution is not saying, look, we're all going to have to reduce our consumption down to 1950s level, because I think when you tell people that, and I think the environmental movement is a little bit guilty over here, and I have a lot of criticism, although a lot of respect for them, because I know how hard it is. Many people give up their life, give up their quality of life to be able to do this. But telling people that we're going to have to reduce our lifestyles down to 1950s, or telling people that we've got 11 years left, okay, I think is going to be counterproductive. I think it's counterproductive. And I'm going to be really practical here. If we tell people that there's 11 years left, everybody's going to go out and be more irresponsible. Because frankly, if you have 11 years left, you're just going to party, right, for the next 11 years.
I can't see anybody... disempowering, isn't it?
Yes. If you tell people, look, basically the world as we know it is finished in 11 years, it's basically like telling somebody, look, you won a lottery ticket, but you're going to die in the next 3 months. So what are you going to do? You're going to go out and spend it. I don't think that's going to create the consciousness and the drive to change habit. So how will we solve it? Because I haven't actually explained how we're going to solve the environmental problem, right? The way we're going to do that is by depreciating the currency. So,
and there is the accounting angle, Jonathan.
We were waiting for it.
So, I don't know, you guys are probably familiar with the boiling frog theorem, right? There's this theorem. It's actually not scientifically proven, but I'm just going to use it to illustrate. There's
I'm glad it's not scientifically proven.
Yeah, because somebody would have to kill a poor frog, right? So there's a theorem that says if you throw a frog into a bowl of very hot water, the frog's going to basically jump out and save itself. While you put it in a bowl of tepid water and heat the water to boiling point, the frog will stay in there and die. It's actually not true, but I just want to use that as a way of describing this. What I want to do with the solution is introduce what I call the cooling frog concept, right? You kind of reverse that on its head, that over a period of years, we can gradually reduce our carbon emissions quantifiably by I wouldn't say fixed amount, but by a regular amount every year. So just to amplify, if in year one we're starting with 48,000 carbs each, in the next year the government will give us, say, 46, and then 42, and then 38, and hopefully all the way down. I mean, if we follow what the environmental movement says, if we come down to 60, 55%, 60, we're actually there, right? Now, the good thing about the solution is that we're not asking anybody to make a massive switch, right? When you tell people, okay, you're all going to have to become tomorrow vegetarian, you're going to stop driving, you're going to stop flying, and stop buying rubbish on Amazon. That's the only company I'm going to mention. Promise. Okay? It's completely unrealistic to think that, a mass of the Western population, let alone the problems we have in the less part developed world, right, where the problems are enormous to even suggest something like this. Nobody's going to do it. I mean, people have to admit that nobody apart from these truly converted, which is probably less than 3% of the world, is actually going to make any moves in that direction. But what if we told everybody that we are going to give you a mechanism to reduce your carbon, your responsibility for carbon emissions, say by 4% a year? Okay, and we're going to do this by equipping you with this currency and reducing the amount of that currency we give you every year, say by 4%. Now, people may say, oh my God, that's a kind of 4%, I can probably deal with it. But the good news over here is that once you introduce this mechanism, the business community, right, so the second leg in this tripod, all of a sudden have a really compelling reason and a compelling motivation to reduce the amount of carbon that they're using in their production processes. Why?
So you go and buy tomatoes and you see a label that says lower carbon, and you think, oh, that's good.
Yeah. That's quite interesting. It's quite interesting as well, because I'm imagining as you start to reduce the amount of carbs available, people will start to move towards businesses that one, generate less, but also as a byproduct of that, you will start exposing businesses that actually have very heavy carbon footprints as well.
I would say that they will go. They will become the dinosaurs. They will be the ones going extinct, right?
Yeah.
You think Oliver mentioned the tomato. That's interesting. Food will actually have 3 labels now. Okay, it's going to have a price in pounds. It's going to have a calorific content, and it also have a carbs content. Okay, so every product on earth will have 2 prices. Will have the price in pounds or dollars or whatever currency that consumers is spending the money in, and it will have a price in carbs. So
I can already see the marketing campaign. There's the price you pay and what it costs.
Yeah,
exactly, precisely. And once you start, so this is the idea of the cooling frog. Once you start reducing people's allocation of this currency, so this currency is an extinguishable currency, right? In an ideal world, this currency will come down to zero because nothing we produce, nothing we consume will produce any carbon emissions, right? Sort of that's the beautiful end state. But we don't even have to worry about that because nobody's actually asking for that. Not even the most ardent of, not even Greta Thunberg is asking for that. Okay, if I can use her in this podcast, what we have to do is reduce them enough to keep the emissions down to below 3%, and you guys probably know all about that. But once you reduce the currency, then there's less of this currency going around, which means that the people producing the goods or the services have a big reason. It's not just corporate social responsibility bullshit, if you understand what I'm talking about, right? They have a commercial imperative to reduce the amount of carbon in whatever they produce, be that cars or mobile phones or stationary products. You guys know what a big fan of those I am. Or anything else you buy. They're really going to have to get off their proverbial ass and do something about it. The job of government then is to use the concept of the Green New Deal to finance the businesses that want to make that efficiency gain. And that's how the tripod fundamentally stands, right? You have consumers who buy into the system, but know that the business is going to make the effort to reduce the amount of carbon in the products, okay? And government is going to be there, one, to regulate the system, because of course all systems are subject to fraud and everything else, but more important, to provide the public funding for producers who now, it's not just wanting, now really just have to reduce the carbon content of the products and services they provide. Now, that's actually the boring stuff of my solution. Sorry, I think there was a question, Jonathan. I don't want to.
Oh, yeah. So I was just wondering, because you were saying about reducing the amount of carbs created. Are we able to generate carbs? Is that an option if the government's restricting them?
It's actually a little bit even better than that. There's a number of things you can do, right? I'm going to try and build a picture, right? You are given 48,000 carbs a year. If you are Mr. Eco Warrior, so you live because you choose to, or maybe because you're compelled to, you don't drive, you use public transport, you travel maybe once a year, you're a vegetarian, so you actually, we all know, or maybe we don't all know how much carbon and pollution is involved in eating animals rather than plants. We'll come to that maybe in another day. Because you're an Eco Warrior, okay, you will not need your 48,000 carbs a year. Now, because you don't need your 48,000 carbs a year, you are going to be free to sell your extra carbs to the person who wants to buy his expensive car, wants to go on expensive holidays and all that, right? So we create a trading mechanism around the carbs at an individual level. So that if Alex, the Eco Warrior, I call him in the document, this person knows that he's not going to come anywhere close to 48,000. He's probably going to need 26,000. Any point in the year, he can sell 1, 2, 1,000, 5,000 carbs, literally on a public exchange, okay? And he will sell these for hard cash. So the person who wants to continue living the way he is and perhaps go on even more flights and is probably going to need to consume 70,000 carbs can only acquire extra carbs if he buys them off the people who are willing to sell them to him. This is where we sort of blend the market mechanism into environmental problems.
I can imagine walking into a Mercedes dealership, and that's not something that I'm ever likely to do in my life, but I can imagine somebody walking into a Mercedes dealership and the Mercedes dealership offsetting the price and saying, we'll pay for your extra carbs up to 10,000 or whatever it might
be. Businesses cannot trade in carbs.
Can they give you discounts for carbs?
No. Businesses cannot mess around with it. The only obligation for business is to label the products with the right amount of carbs, which obviously will have to be audited independently. But businesses cannot meddle around in carbs. The only thing that businesses can do is make the production processes more efficient. Okay, and business will also be enabled to create schemes. This is another facet of the currency, so that consumers can actually create carbs. So how do I, from 48,000, create more carbs? how do I acquire more carbs? There's essentially two ways. I can buy carbs from anybody wanting to sell them, okay? Or else I can invest my hard cash into schemes, okay, that will enable the offsetting of carbon. So if there's
this is a good idea. So that means that investing in renewables, say through your pension, becomes an avenue.
cash and carbs. Okay, so if let's make this really simple, right? So if there's a company that's saying, "Oh, we are planting trees across, I don't know, the Scottish Highlands," right? And this is, I'm being simplistic here, but on purpose so people can understand where I'm coming from. And this company will plant trees, and it is science. Obviously, there has to be some science around this. That planting trees is gonna result in more carbon capture because of the nature of that process. And if you invest your money, you put money into this scheme, okay, for your money, you'll also be able to increase your amount of carbs if you so want. Okay, so there are many things that are going to happen around the carbs. You can sell them, you can buy them, you can create them by investing in environmental schemes. What you can't do is just consume as much as you want. What we're taking away is, so the richest guy on earth can on day one only consume as much as me, right? So the system is perfectly progressive. It's perfectly equitable, right?
What do you mean by that? I don't quite understand.
What do I
So
mean?
let's just say I've got 5 billion in the bank.
Yeah. You're still going to get 48,000 carbs at the beginning of the year, and that's all you can consume. You want to consume more, you're going to have to find the little Joe who wants to sell them to you.
I see.
Now, you don't have to go knocking on somebody's door, okay? We create an open public exchange where carbs get traded. Okay? You're not going to have to knock on your neighbor's door and say, "Can you sell me some carbs?" We basically create a public exchange where at any point in time I can log into my account and see whether there are any carbs available for me to buy. Completely market driven, right? Completely
What
market
happens
driven.
when the marketplace runs dry? Or do you not see that being a possibility?
Good question. The difficulty on this, or rather the challenge, rather than the difficulty, is that we won't be able to continue just consuming blindly, right? You're going to have to sort of keep tabs on your carbs, like you expect people to keep tabs on how much pounds they have in their bank account. They're also going to have to keep an account. They're going to need to be aware of the amount of carbs they still have available to consume for the rest of, say, the financial year. Okay. Sorry, your question was when we run out of carbs.
Yeah. So just imagine that Mr. Smith, who has 5 billion in the bank, decides that he wants to buy 1 billion carbs.
Oh,
and there is only 1 million in the marketplace.
I see what you mean. There has to be some control. The system has to avoid pure speculation, right? So there has to be a top level. I can't just because I'm rich, grab money and buy myself 500,000 carbs, right? There has to be a ceiling on how many you can buy. There has to be some ceiling. You will buy them to consume them, not buy them to sell them off at a profit.
Yeah.
So how do governments decide how many carbs to allocate to their populace? Because if you think about if my population is made up of, this is probably very imaginative, 50% billionaires, then how am I supposed to decide how much do you guys consume in a year and what is appropriate for my population?
Okay, so this introduces a much wider problem, which is how do you regulate this? How do you manage it at a global level, right? So, and these are serious problems. I mean, I don't have all the solutions in my paper. If I had, I wouldn't be on a podcast. I'd probably be working in the United Nations or something like that. But this has to stem from at a global level. The amount of carbs has to be allocated first among perhaps regions, and then perhaps amongst countries, and then the countries allocate them individually. So it's a simple division by. So if Britain gets the right to, I don't know, 65 billion carbs, it's a simple division by 66 million people. Okay, everybody in the United Kingdom will get the same amount. That's what I mean by equitable. So the poorest, the guy living in the street, or the richest guy in the United Kingdom get 48,000 carbs. So
that has a really interesting connotation in terms of, if you think of the guy living on the street or the woman living on the street, as has sadly been the case since COVID, I've noticed, if they did come into 48,000 carbs, that gives them, in a way, a form of living wage, right? That they can trade, because they are not consuming a fraction of certain other people. I like that.
I'm not for today, but I'm a big fan of UBI, as you probably know, and I think this is probably a
UBI,
universal basic income.
Yes.
This is probably the backdoor approach to getting to UBI.
Right.
I would say.
Right. Yeah, makes sense.
But it's perfectly progressive in that we start January the 1st, we all start from 48,000. That's the amount everybody gets. And if the guy down the road wants to change his car and buy a big, expensive, polluting car, he's got to come into the market and buy the carbs. But it doesn't really matter, because from a global level, the only thing that counts is the total amount of carbon emitted into the atmosphere, right? Who emits that carbon is largely irrelevant. It's actually completely irrelevant, right? So if I decide, look, I'm going to give up my driving because the sucker down the road wants to buy 6,000 carbs a year off me, I'm going to cash in on that. And I can spend my money on buying my less carbon intensive services. Because that's what does good look like? Good is a world where we are less hooked on buying rubbish, okay, which we put in our drawers and in our offices and look for a bit, use a bit, and never use again. We switch away from what I call carbon intensive products to less intensive services, right? That's the world I think we should be aiming to live in. Not that we sit in our cave and not go out because the world's coming to an end in 11 years, right? I want to imagine a world where my children, because this is for my kids, right? I'm going to be too old to see this anyway by then. I want to live in a world where my kids are spending their hard-earned income on buying the services and the experiences that enrich their life, enrich their minds, rather than just buying rubbish that gets delivered to your door every second day.
Yeah. Is there any sort of oversight? Are there any sort of are there going to be large in the solution any entities that sort of manage and regulate a lot of this? I know you mentioned it earlier with regards to auditing and stuff, but with the currency, I'd imagine would banks.
So if I can take a step back, I'm going to ask the question myself. First of all, how do you calculate the carbs in each product, right? So this has to happen through the supply chain. So if you're making a complex product, let's say you're making a product that requires 5 components, right? I'm really simplifying, right? Well, you make a widget that requires 5 components down in the supply chain. Everyone downstream in the supply chain needs to tell you how much carbon content their component has. So then when I grab the 5 components and make my product, I just very simply sum total the amount of carbon in the 5 components, right? So it's built on it's almost like a VAT system. That's probably not going to be helpful for most of our listeners, right? But if it's costed, if the components required to make my product, okay, come with 200 carbs, right? So everybody producing the components to make my product needs to tell me how much each of that component has in carbs. How much
and
carbon
we know this is actually happening today in terms of CO2 emissions because people like Heineken are tracking it, right? Which causes them to say to the glass industry, we need you to be carbon neutral because you're the only part of our supply chain, as I understand it, that is yet to evolve, right?
That is it. So it's basically an accumulation system, right? That will start literally from the raw materials, the stuff we take out of the earth, because ultimately everything we have around us comes from the earth. Doesn't come from anywhere else, as far as I'm concerned. So the supply chain, literally at the lower end, comes from a lot of the oil industry, where we produce our plastics, perhaps wood, and of course, the big one is of course food and drink, because food and drink will not be exempt on this. Some items will be exempt, right? You're definitely going to exempt things like, I don't know, water, right, or some sort of grains, which are subsistence foods. But when it comes to richer foods, and especially meat products, the carbon content of meat is tremendous. I mean, most people don't actually realize that you read about it.
That's quite interesting because I'm sure bottled water, that has a footprint in it as well.
Oh yeah,
actually,
absolutely.
so that'll be
And
interesting.
so when you open the tap in your own kitchen to drink a glass of water, that's going to essentially be carbs free, right?
Yeah.
But when you go down to the store and buy yourself a bottle of water in a plastic bottle, that's not going to be carbs free. Okay, and think about the thought processes you're going to have around that. It's not, oh, it just costs £1 and I'm going to buy it because I don't care. It's going to be, it costs £1 and it also costs 14 carbs. Okay, and in the back of my mind, my carbs 48,000 is fixed. I can't just like make it increase. By the way, you can't borrow to create carbs.
That's a really good idea.
Yep.
So there's no credit.
No, there's no credit. The credit system lives outside of it.
Okay. I tell you what, Jonathan, it gives new meaning to the idea low carb diet or low carb lifestyle.
That is true.
So you've got this idea, Eddie. You've written it down. You've given it some time. Bless your family for giving you that time to do so. What happens next? What is the journey of trying to get this idea out there, and how can you reflect on that for other people who might have similar good ideas?
This is the nature of me as a person, right? And I have to be careful how to say this because I'm going to sound preposterous. I tend to be the ideas guy rather than the person to grab an idea and go and make it into something really big. And I was happy when I wrote this. I actually wrote this in my document. It's on the front page. I have specifically said that I have no commercial interest in the idea. I don't want to make money from it. It's just something I kind of wrote it for my kids, if you know what I mean. Like this is what I'm going to kind of bequeath to you. Having said that, it is going to take. I am struggling to think how we're going to take an idea that today nobody actually challenged me on. Oh, actually, this is a really silly idea. Most people tell me this is really clever. This could actually work. How to take this to some sort of fruition, to some sort of implementation. Without saying too much, I'll tell you my experience in the UK. I have shared the idea with organizations who you would think would be interested in this because they sort of come from the environmental movement, and the response has been virtually zero, right? I'm going to be a little bit cynical here. I think they're still addicted to the protesting. And I don't think they even look at something like this. The second you put the word market in a document like this, people in sort of the green movement say, oh, good, he's good, capitalist trying to sell us this. I'm not a capitalist. I don't come from that brand of thought. I consider myself a kind of center-left person, mainly. I have tried to share it with people in government in the United Kingdom with very little success. The only success I'm having, there's some irony in this, with the coming date of 31st December 2020, is actually within the European Union itself. And I've had very early discussions with people who can influence this because, of course, this can't work at an individual country basis.
No,
in an ideal world,
that's the really interesting thing, right? Because the one of the challenges, I think, is that as a globe, we know that certain countries are consuming too much and everybody needs them to consume less, right?
But there are certain countries who need to consume more, right? We can't expect countries in the developing world to cut down on their carbs. We should expect them increasing their carbs, right?
Yeah.
It's also have to make a bigger shift, right? There's a fine balance over there, but it's not like everybody's going to reduce their carbon emissions by 4% a year. You can't tell that people living on subsistence, in sub-Saharan Africa to do that. It's just crazy. And it's also unworkable for obvious reasons. I imagine, and I'm going to pick on you, Oliver, over here. I imagine that a pilot in a beautiful island to the southeast corner of the globe.
Yeah. Yeah, it's possible that that kind of country might be interested. Yeah. And the interesting thing is, like, I think about the growing awareness, and I think you're right that people are becoming more and more aware of the issues around us and drawing the dotted line to the climate and to our activities. And I think you're right that the younger generations, and like if you think of your two little kids, Jonathan, by the time they get to Eddie's kids' ages, someone like Greta Thunberg will just be one of many people who they've thought about, listened to, and talked about, right? They'll be very engaged. But the thing is, how do we get that to a largely baby boomer and older dominated government structure across the world, right? Like how do we get people to come together and implement something like this that could really work and could spin off scoreboards and people talking to each other about their carbs and competitions in terms of, communities coming together to be the lowest carb using part of, London or whatever.
Yeah, and companies as well, like businesses, adding that extra edge ahead of your competitors. Like I know that some companies, such as Apple, are trying to use all recycled materials and become carbon neutral. And others like Microsoft are having servers run by renewable energies as well. So that's really interesting. Is that it will shape the way businesses offer their services and products in a more environmentally friendly way, and it gives consumers an incentive to actually lean towards that. If I'm choosing an electric supplier, rather than just going from the standard or whatever's cheaper, I can say, well, actually, the benefit is I'm saving this amount of carbs. So I can say, all right, I want a renewable energy source, a company that's supplying me with my energy. So, yeah.
And what's really important is that you would then have the choice and the information, right?
Exactly. It's like you're not. Sounds like you're not forcing people to actually change the way that they consume things. It's more of a, you still have a choice. You can still go and get the unenvironmentally friendly option. You can still buy your gas guzzling car. You can still buy whatever it is you really want. It's just that now you know that, all right, the consequences, and it's really quite in the front of your mind that this is going to affect future generations. This is actually going to affect the environment.
If you draw a parallel to calorie labeling, right? And the jury is probably still out on how much that's worked. In a way, labeling the carbs content on products and services is going to bring around at least some awareness, right? When you go and buy a really fatty, sugary packet of biscuits, the red label, there's a little bit of guilt over there, but you can basically just buy it and consume it, right? The difference with this is when you see that label there, you're actually going to spend some currency, not pounds, carbs, to have to buy that, right? And you know that you have a limited amount of carbs you can use. So you have an option. You can walk away from the product and say, I'm going to buy so many biscuits anymore. I was going to see more movies with my girlfriend because we really enjoy doing that. I don't get so much pleasure from eating biscuits all the time. Okay. And I'm on the presumption that that's going to consume less carbs. Or else I'm going to have to buy better biscuits or less biscuits. But I think once you put the value of carbs on a product or service, the consciousness is the first thing, right? That why should I choose this before that? Because we never really make that decision, right? We make most of our consumption decisions on the spur of the moment, if you think about it. At least I do. I'll take the bullet for that, right? We buy a lot of impulse, right? We live in a world where you click a mouse and get something delivered to your door the next 14 hours.
Or if you're hungry, you can get it in the next 20 minutes, right? Via pizza.
Yeah, exactly.
I agree, because if you front load, so back to your calorie analogy, if you had to do the gym work to work off those calories before you brought the product, I don't think everybody would be going out buying biscuits and burgers, right? So
calories is a bad way of labeling it. It would be probably better to say 27.6 minutes on a treadmill. Kind of, I think I'll probably have, from a marketing communication perspective, that would probably be more effective. And if we talked about implementation, right? So how do you go from how would you even start doing this, right? And I did a lot of thinking around this because I want the practicable to live with the theoretical. And I thought you do it in 5 big stages, right? So I thought the first stage you do is what I call transport and traveling. So this would apply in phase 1 every time you filled up your car or you bought plane tickets, right? Which is actually quite a large part of carbon emissions of the individual consumer. It's a big amount of your carbon footprint. And that's why would you do that first? to be fair, because it's actually really easy to monitor. You can't buy fuel, you can't book airline tickets without somebody else knowing, right? It's really easy to control. The second stage is probably it's maybe the first most responsible for carbon footprint is domestic energy. So the energy bills you receive at home, right, for electricity and gas, and how you expend carbs on that, because those two are quite controllable, right? Because you're either buying fuel from a fuel station, or buying tickets from an airline, or buying your energy from a handful of energy companies in the UK.
And that's an interesting one because we're looking at double glazed windows at the moment, right? And I know there's a cost, but I also know there's a cost. And I think about that, but maybe that's because of the way I was raised. Do you know what I mean? I'd love other people to see that and to see why single glazing is costing more in carbs and energy and in heating than double glazing. So I can see home energy use being a big one.
The third one would be food and drink. Okay, the one that nobody thinks is going to be affected, but it has to be affected. Food is a big contribution of that. It's probably the third. Okay, then I have the fourth category, which is really large. It's called all other products, right? So everything else you can think that you buy, right? Things, stuff, and finally, it's all other services. So literally, the end state is that even a haircut will involve a carbs decision. Okay, and it's probably going to be really minor, right? But when the person giving you the haircut goes to buy his hair dryers, he's not just going to take into account the cost and the quality of the hair dryer, but also the amount of energy it consumes. So that when people go into his store or into his parlor to get a haircut, he can say, actually, it's £12 a haircut, but I'm actually much cheaper in carb terms than the guys down the road.
Can I ask a question? There's something that a friend asked me when I was talking about this episode. They said they'd heard that the idea of individual carbon footprint measurement had been originally supported by big oil because it may lead to a focus of blame on the individual rather than a coming together and collective action to improve the way that we live. Is this system a way around the idea of saying, it's my fault, I've wrecked the world, there's no tuna, I might as well just keep eating tuna? Do you know what I mean?
I think it's a responsibility. With responsibility comes power, right? Once the power is down to consumer level, we've taken away the power from the big corporates, right? The oil majors and the ones. It's easy to say, oh, the oil majors are responsible for low carbon emissions, but they're not really. The only reason they're taking oil out of the ground is to satisfy our demand. Now, they do a lot of other horrible things, right? Like do damage to indigenous populations in these areas. That's all like terrible stuff, right? But taking that apart, the only reason they take oil from the ground is to sell it to us or to sell it to companies making stuff, right? So it's really easy for individuals and people in the environmental movement turn around and say, oh, let's just go and hate the oil majors because like that's the easy thing to do. But the only reason these guys are producing, taking this thing off the ground is for us, right? If we want to consume less of it because we're more aware of the real environmental cost of doing this, they're going to have to adapt, right?
Yeah, I remember a marketing lecturer saying, talking about the power of marketing and the power of consumer choice, and he said to the class, if you want to see less of it, buy less of it.
Yeah, this is the bone of contention I have with the environmental movement, right? Like it's really easy to sit back and say, "Oh, let's go and." I mean, it's important that they do it because you need the consciousness. Without that, we would never be at the point we are today, right? I'm going to give them full credit for doing this. Okay, but it's all ultimately all this production and pollution happens because we are demanding
Consuming
that stuff, right?
Yeah, it's the same idea as the ivory trade, right?
Precisely. I mean, they couldn't have picked on a better example, right? Like, do we have to have piano keys made out of ivory? Like, why? Doesn't make a better sound, does it?
And there was a stunned silence. Are you still there, Jonathan?
Yeah,
I'm still here. I'm still here as well. I was like, wow, that's
that's profound.
Yeah, that was profound. I was like, oh yeah, because I'm relatively young, so I don't even remember anything to do with the ivory trade other than it's really bad stuff. But yeah, no, that is quite interesting of how that's actually. I imagine pretty much wiped out in the Western world. So,
although, was it Cecil the lion gave an indication of how certain people will still go and do what they want because they the thrill of shooting animals.
Yeah, that's
but I mean, if you took that example, even just getting there, that American dentist would have incurred some serious carbs to even get there, and and at least is paying more than they are paying today.
Yeah. And I imagine all the components in his gun as well would cost a fair amount of carbs.
Indeed.
So, yeah.
So what would you say to somebody who's sitting there thinking, yeah, I've got an idea. I'm thinking about something and it's been keeping me awake at night and I'd like to see something done about it and I want to share it. What would you suggest to them, Eddie?
Simple solution is probably write it down first, right? The thinking grows as you start writing stuff because you have to be self-critical of what you're doing. I mean, the last page in my paper talks about the big challenges, right? And I can probably mention a couple of because I don't want to be unrealistic, right? How do you factor in new houses to this, for example? Massive problem, right? Because that by definition is going to have a really big high carbs content. So if you build houses, how are you going to factor that in? How are you going to cater for immigrants, right? People coming in and out of a country. How do they factor in? How are you going to cater for legal and illegal immigrants, right? The massive challenges. How do you cater for children, right? How do you monitor this on an IT systems? But these are all technical problems. And to be fair, I don't want to deal with them. I don't think it's my job. I think there are engineers, scientists, IT people who can deal with those problems. What you need to have is enough goodwill at a decision-making level to say, we know that if we don't do anything, we're going to be really stuffed. Is this the thing I'm going to propose and put forward to make me look like the hero? I'm not talking about myself, right? There has to be a political actor who wants to take something like this forward. Interestingly, after I wrote this, during the lockdown, I started, because as far as I knew, the idea was original, but I never claimed it to be original because I haven't read all the books on Earth, right? But I did find a paper about it written about 12 years ago, something similar. And I actually managed to get that paper and I read it. It was 40-odd pages, so roughly the size of what I wrote. And what was really disappointing, because somebody actually thought about this 12 years ago, right? I wasn't the only person to think about it. That the idea was kind of ditched. The conclusion was, this is going to be too hard to do at the political level, so I think we should just drop it. And I'm thinking, like, if the world continues to be like that, right, we're just never going to progress. I mean, we're living in really, really weird times. I don't need to tell you guys, right? We're living in the age of science and massive IT improvements, and we tend to be, in some ways, our political class tends to becoming dumber. The more technological solutions, the more IT, the more artificial intelligence we're applying, it seems to dumb down the people who are supposed to lead us and have the power to lead us, right? And I'm hoping that there's going to be enough people, or maybe one person, because these things tend to happen with one person who kind of takes the initiative to say, look, we need to do something about this. We can't tell people to, like, stop driving your car, stop eating meat from tomorrow because we're all going to die in 11 years. But I do have something that we could probably work with together. And of course, at the end of it, it's not going to look like the way I'm presenting it today. It's going to look very different, but that's expected, right? But I'm hoping for my Saint Paul to turn up, if I could put the biblical analogy, for someone who can actually front this, right? And I'm still on that journey. There are still means I'm going through, but sadly, COVID hit in March, and the political connections I was trying to put together to present this and say, why don't you guys have a second to us, a good think about this to possibly turn it into policy? That stopped in March for obvious reasons, right?
Well, we'll do the little bit we can to help share the good idea when we
appreciate it.
Yeah, we will. I mean, we'll host it on our website, so the links will be below in our description and the show summary notes. So feel free to pop on there and have a look. It is as he was saying, it's we're all in it together. So it will be great to get some feedback and some some ideas that we can forward through to Eddie and all advance this wonderful solution. Fantastic.
thank you for being on the show, Eddie.
Cheers, guys.
It's really cool to start the journey of highlighting people who are thinking about things and wanting things to improve and are willing to write it down, like you say.
Cheers, guys. Good evening, and thanks.
That's it. Thank you very much, Eddie. And to our wonderful listeners out there, we want to thank you for tuning in of this episode of Problem Busters with Edward Fenech and his paper on his solution to climate change and creating a cleaner world for us all and for the future generations. His paper titled Clean New World is available to review on our website at problembusters.fm. And if you have any feedback, you can email us at studio@problembusters.fm, and we'll be happy to forward that over to Eddie.
And if you find a subscribe button, that's probably worth pushing.
Yes, subscribe, follow, and share this episode. You can find us on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn. So,
of course you can.
Fantastic.
Thanks, folks. And that's a wrap.